South Park has spent almost 20 years putting internet creators on screen, and in 2008, it invented a government office that paid them in money you could see through. 10 of those creators were real people with real careers, and most of them answered back. In this video, we break down South Park versus YouTubers. PewDiePie. By 2014, the most subscribed person on the internet was a Swedish man filming his own face while he played video games. South Park had spent years arguing that internet fame paid nothing, and then put the actual man on screen in live action. The show built its own version of him first, sold that version to the audience as a career, and then handed the real man a chance to end it. Rehash aired on December 3rd, 2014, and the story starts with something completely ordinary. Kyle has bought video games so he can play them with Ike, which is the kind of thing an older brother does, and Ike is not interested. Ike would rather watch PewDiePie's Let's Play videos, in which a man narrates his own reactions while playing a game somebody else made. Kyle cannot understand the appeal of watching a stranger play instead of playing. Ike and his friends have a word for that position, and the word is grandpa. Kyle takes it badly, and so does Stan when he gets dragged in. The two of them insist they are not being grandpas, and that the things the younger kids like are simply lame, which is the least convincing argument available, and the only one they have. There is no counter to being called old. The more they explain why watching somebody else play a game makes no sense, the more clearly they are the two people in the room who do not get it. Cartman looks at the same situation and sees a business. He has noticed that people are becoming famous and making money for commenting on things, so he starts a channel under the name Cartman Bra, and his product is commentary about other people's commentary. He is not playing games, and he is not reviewing games. He is reacting to the reactions. He tells Mr. Garrison this is the way of the future, and he keeps Butters around because Butters will agree with anything he says, which gives him the appearance of an audience before he actually has one. The first episode ends with Cartman being hired. A record producer, deep in a scheme of his own, takes one look at the commentary channel and puts the kid on a payroll for his access to a young audience. That is the last beat before the finale, and Cartman Bra stops being an independent channel at that point. Within 1 week of story time, the commentary act that existed to comment on other people's commenting has been bought by a man with a television budget. The man Cartman is imitating was, in December of 2014, a 25-year-old Swede named Felix Kjellberg, and he ran the most subscribed individual channel on YouTube with around 32 million subscribers. He had started that channel in 2010, and by the middle of the following year, its videos had passed 9 billion total views between them. He was signed to Maker Studios, which Disney had bought that year, and he had money. In July of 2014, he confirmed publicly that he had earned roughly $4 million in 2013 from making videos of himself playing games, which is a figure that would have been unthinkable to anybody uploading a video 6 years earlier. Something had changed in the years immediately before that, and it had changed quietly. For most of the internet's first decade, an enormous audience came with no way of turning it into money, and South Park had built jokes out of exactly that gap. 6 years later, one man had both. The advertising split that had not existed a few years earlier was now paying a single creator more per year than most television actors, and every joke the show had made about internet money being worthless had stopped describing the situation. Comedy Central knew it too. When the network promoted the cameo, the framing was that it hoped some of his 32 million fans might turn on a television to watch him, which is a cable channel openly hoping a YouTuber would drive its ratings. The way he appears in the episode is the detail that matters most. He is not a drawing. He is not a parody character with a different name, like the composites the show would use later. He appears in live action as himself, using clips from his own videos, cut into the animation on screens the characters are watching. Every other internet figure South Park had ever put in an episode was redrawn as a cartoon and killed in a crowd scene. This one was allowed on screen in his own footage, under his own name, doing his own act. The title of that first episode is Doing Something Sly, and it points back at the show rather than at the kids. Rehash is built almost entirely out of storylines from earlier in the same season. Randy's secret career as Lord is still running. The logo from the episode about the boys starting a company with no product turns up again. A customer service character from the virtual reality episode comes back. Cartman's demand for his own bathroom had been established weeks earlier, so while Kyle is complaining that the new generation just watches other people's content instead of making anything, the episode delivering that complaint is assembled from recycled pieces of itself, and the writers named it after the accusation. The story continues in the finale a week later. On December 10th, Kyle changes tactics. Instead of arguing, he goes public with an idea about the thing he actually cares about, which is that families have scattered and living rooms are dying, and he starts a trend to bring people back into the same room. It works. The trend spreads, a network picks it up, and Kyle is offered a holiday television special built around his hashtag, with the biggest names in entertainment attached. He agrees, because this is exactly what he wanted. Then he sees the commercial. The special has been assembled by by a record producer working with Cartman, who has been hired specifically for his youthful perspective, and the lineup includes living celebrities, holograms of dead ones, and live commentary from Cartman Bra over the top of the whole thing. Kyle's campaign to get families back into the living room has become a delivery vehicle for the exact thing he was arguing against. The trend was never his, it was inventory, and somebody with a production budget bought it. The rest of that special shows what the industry's answer to the creator economy looked like in 2014. Alongside Cartman's commentary, the lineup is built on holograms of dead performers, and the finale is full of them. A hologram of Michael Jackson gets arrested. A hologram of Tupac has been wandering through Randy and Sharon's storyline. Even the man who comes to Kyle's door to pitch the special turns out to be a hologram once the door closes. The producer's plan is to fill a broadcast with reanimated stars and a fourth grader talking over them, and to sell that as family entertainment. Faced with an audience that had started watching individual people on the internet, the answer from the people with money was to rent the dead. Cartman keeps climbing after that, and the episode escalates him past anything a channel could support. He trends so hard that he becomes self-aware and starts hijacking screens all over the world, appearing wherever he chooses, unable to be shut down by the producer who hired him. He declares that his trending status has made him a new category of person, and that he is therefore entitled to his own bathroom at school, which had been the point of the entire scheme since an earlier episode. The most powerful entity in the world, at that moment in the story, is a fourth grader with a commentary channel and a bathroom demand. Kyle gives up the argument in the middle of that chaos. Realizing that the whole planet can see each other on the hijacked screens, he speaks directly to Ike and apologizes for being a grandpa. He accepts that his brother is going to have his own generation's interests, and he admits the part underneath the whole conflict, which is that he had been jealous that Ike was a fan of Cartman. Ike and his friends respond by starting a trend of their own, telling Kyle they believe in him, and Kyle asks the world to spread it. That trend is what brings PewDiePie into the story physically. He arrives in response and overpowers Cartman, ending Cartman Bra's hold on the world's screens. Then he goes back to what he was doing before, which is playing Call of Duty, and he thanks South Park for having him on the show. The most powerful force in the episode is stopped by the real creator, and the real creator treats it as a Tuesday. The show's own method fails completely here, and it fails on purpose. South Park's standard machinery is to bring in an outsider, humiliate them, and restore the town. That works on celebrities because celebrities can be shamed and sent home. It did not work on this one because there was nothing to humiliate. Cartman is the parody. Cartman is the one exposed as a fraud running a channel to get a bathroom, and the actual YouTuber walks through the episode untouched and gets the last word. Kyle's closing monologue is the concession, and it is remarkable coming from this show. He admits there is no lesson, that they may never understand what they have just been through, and that not understanding it might be the point, because they have witnessed the beginning of a new art form. Then he says, the thing that changes the shape of this entire video. He says that at least YouTube celebrities are authentic, because they were never marketed to the public by corporations or by the entertainment industry. In 2014, South Park's verdict was that the creators were the honest ones. The money underneath that verdict kept growing and kept being awkward. In July of 2015, a Swedish newspaper worked through the dividends paid by Kjellberg's companies and estimated he had made around $7.4 million in 2014. He responded with a video about money, saying he had deliberately avoided the subject for the 5 years he had been making videos because he did not think it was important to anyone, that a lot of people had reacted with anger, and that when he started, he was a college student on a loan who could not afford a computer capable of recording gameplay, and had funded the setup by selling artwork he made online. The origin of the Kyle storyline explains why that part of the episode is so specific. Parker has said the PewDiePie plot came out of his own experience with his stepson, which is to say, the argument in the Broflovski house was a real argument in a real house, and Kyle's apology at the end was written by the person who had lost it. What happened afterward tested Kyle's monologue directly. Kjellberg remained the most subscribed channel on YouTube until a music label overtook him in 2019, and the most subscribed individual creator until MrBeast passed him in 2021. In February of 2017, following reporting on anti-Semitic content in a run of his videos, Maker Studios ended its affiliation with him, which meant a Disney subsidiary had both signed and dropped the man South Park had described as authentic on the grounds that corporations had never marketed him. The corporate relationship had been there the whole time. It had just been invisible from a living room in Colorado. There is one small detail that shows the traffic went both ways. Kjellberg has said that his own channel intro, the high-pitched way he announces his name at the start of a video, was based on Mr. Hankey's greeting from South Park. So the most subscribed creator on the internet had built part of his on-screen identity out of a South Park character years before South Park built a character out of him. The show did not discover him from a standing start. It was already inside the thing it was describing. The word that follows Kyle out of the two-parter is grandpa. He earns it by wanting to play a game with his brother instead of watching one, and by the end of the finale, finale, he has apologized for it, given up the argument, and settled for 1 hour of family time a night. The show never hands him the point back. It gives it to a man in live action who beat a fictional 4th grader and then returned to his game, having already worked out how to be paid for something that had made nobody before him a penny. 6 years separate an internet where none of this paid anything from that $4 million year, and nothing in the story explains how the gap closed. The mechanism simply arrived, quietly, in the form of an advertising split, and the people who happened to be uploading when it arrived were the ones who got to keep it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. South Park's copy of a YouTuber is beaten on screen by the real one, who goes straight back to his game. 9 years later, the money had moved out of the videos into a bottle that a 4th grader at South Park Elementary would fight to be seen holding. Section 2. Logan Paul. By 2023, the most profitable thing a YouTuber could do was put his name on a bottle rather than an advert. A drink invented by 2 of them had become the object that decided a child standing at school. South Park rebuilt the commercial that sold it and let the small print say the quiet part out loud. A hydration brand had turned a 4th grade classroom into a status economy, and the boys wanted to know why. South Park, not suitable for children, went out on Paramount Plus on December 20th, 2023, running about 47 minutes, and it opens on Clyde Donovan watching a video. The man in the video is called Logan LaDouche, and he starts with a motivational thought about how the most important thing is to be yourself, then turns, without pausing, into a sales pitch for a hydration drink called Cred. He pours it over his own face mid-workout. He lists the electrolytes and the vitamin content. A child who has drunk it appears and says he cannot feel his face. Then the advertisement closes with a voiceover telling viewers to drink Cred at school, followed immediately by a line stating that the product is not intended for children. Clyde is logged into his father's account while he watches it. The product being described existed. In January of 2022, Logan Paul and the British creator KSI announced Prime Hydration on a joint Instagram livestream, 4 years after a boxing rivalry that had drawn over 1 million pay-per-view buys. Between them, they had a combined YouTube audience in the tens of millions, and the brand was operated by a company called Congo Brands, based in Louisville, rather than by either of them personally. First-year sales were reported by the Washington Post at around $250 million. By November 8, 2023, 6 weeks before the special aired, Bloomberg was reporting that Prime was set to pass $1.2 billion in annual sales, having overtaken Gatorade in Walmart's hydration category. That figure is the reason this section exists. Nothing about it involves being watched. In 2014, the most subscribed man on the internet made roughly $4 million in a year from an advertising split on videos of himself playing games. 9 years later, 2 creators were moving over $1 billion a year in liquid, and the videos had stopped being the product entirely. The videos had become the distribution network. The money bought its way into institutions that had spent a century being unavailable to people like them. Prime signed a partnership with Arsenal in July of 2022. It became the official sports drink of the UFC at the start of 2023 and added a deal with a Major League Baseball team the same year. That summer, it took over the sponsorship position at FC Barcelona that Gatorade had held and added Bayern Munich. There were deals with a Major League Baseball team and, later, with WWE, plus individual endorsements from athletes at the top of American sport. 2 men who had built audiences by filming themselves were now on the front of European football shirts. In December of 2022, a British supermarket chain sold out of the drink so fast that the queues became a news story of their own. Inside the episode, the consequence lands on a classroom. Parents and school administrators at South Park Elementary have become worried about how thoroughly Cred has taken over, because the students are not simply drinking it, they are carrying it. The bottle has become a marker of standing, and Cartman states the situation early with total clarity when he says, "A kid today is defined by their hydration drink." Nobody at the school is arguing about the taste, and nobody needs to, because the drink is not what is being consumed. Clyde has a problem, which is that he is not actually a Cred drinker. His father Roger and his stepmother Janice have forbidden it because of the artificial sweeteners in it, which is an ordinary parental decision made for ordinary reasons. Clyde's response is to push back at Janice by telling her she is not really his mother, which establishes early that the Cred question and the family question are the same question. His classmates then make it worse by being kind to him. Cartman, Tweek, and Butters invite him into an exclusive group for Cred drinkers, and the group only works because it excludes people. Clyde now has access to the thing he wanted, and no legitimate way to hold on to it, so he does what a 4th grader does. He buys an empty Cred bottle on the black market from Nathan and fills it with apple juice. The forgery gets discovered, and the punishment is collective. The whole group is shunned. Not only Clyde, because proximity to a fake bottle is enough to ruin everybody in it. That escalation is the sharpest thing in the episode's first half, and it clarifies what is actually being traded. Clyde never wanted wanted the drink. He wanted the container, and the container had value because other children could see it. An empty bottle sold on a black market is worth something in that school, and a full one bought by the wrong person is worth nothing. The real product worked the same way, and by the time the special aired, that had become a public policy question. In July of 2023, the Senate Majority Leader called on the Food and Drug Administration to investigate Prime's energy product, describing it as a cauldron of caffeine and pointing out that plenty of parents had never heard of it while their children had. The company's position was that the energy line was not intended for anybody under 18. Schools were banning it. Children were reported trading it, sneaking it in, and queuing for limited flavors, and single bottles were reselling online at prices that had nothing to do with a soft drink. So when South Park wrote a black market for empty bottles, it was compressing something that was already happening. The group's attempt to fix their reputation is what breaks the story open. They travel to an event in Pueblo, Colorado to buy a limited edition Super Cred, and the crowd of children who have come for the same reason turns into a riot. That is the point where the boys stop being customers and start thinking. Standing in the wreckage of a stampede for a drink, they work out that they have been manipulated by influencers, and they decide to go and find the one Clyde had been watching. They get to him, and Logan LaDouche does not deny any of it. He explains that he is not the source of anything, that he simply works for a higher power whose job is to influence people. He is a step in a chain rather than the person who built it. Then, before he can name the sponsor above him, a sniper shoots him. The FBI takes the shooter off a rooftop, and the reveal is the best structural joke in the special. The assassin is the auctioneer. He is not the power behind the operation either. He is a middleman, and killing him produces no answer, because the chain simply continues upward past anybody the story is able to reach. The auction he was running is the part that explains everything else. An influence agent lays out the mechanism plainly at one point, describing how sponsors bid against each other for the right to have top influencers promote their products, and the special stages that as an actual auction where influence is sold to the highest bidder. That reframes the entire section. Logan LaDouche is not the seller in this arrangement. He is the stock. The audience he built is the lot being auctioned. The sponsors are the buyers, and the man with his name on the bottle is the thing being moved between them, which is why he can be shot without the operation pausing for a second. Randy reaches the same conclusion from the other side of the story and acts on it. The children come home to find him throwing out his entire supply of cred, and his explanation is the closest thing the special has to a thesis. He says the social media industry is not suitable for children, that children need to know they are always being targeted, and that they need to know who wants to influence them the most. Clyde takes that literally and goes looking for the unseen influencer in his own life, and he finds Janice. She admits that she had been using cred herself, despite being against children drinking it, because it drew Clyde's attention and got him talking to her, which meant the two of them spent time together. The person shaping his behavior most effectively was not the man in the video. It was the stepmother he had told was not his real mother, and she had used the same tool for a reason nobody in the influence auction had a category for, which was that she wanted to be closer to him. The special then refuses to let anybody learn anything, and the ending is better for it. Clyde asks Janice if he can call her mom. She says yes. He immediately swears at her and storms off, and she is delighted anyway, because he called her his mother. At school the following day, the affinity group turns up with a highly sought-after flavor, salvaged from Randy's rubbish. Cartman hands a bottle to Clyde. Clyde drinks it and announces that it tastes amazing, and the entire school celebrates. The status economy resumes at once. The riot, the assassination, and the FBI operation changed nothing about what a bottle is worth in that building. Two details about the real arrangement both turn up in the cartoon. The first is ownership. Business coverage has reported that neither creator owns the brand outright, with the operating company holding the majority and Paul and KSI each holding a minority stake, which places them closer to the front of the bottle than to the top of the company. The second is what South Park chose to put their stand-in for wearing. Viewers noticed immediately that the character had been drawn in professional wrestling gear, because by then Paul had moved from uploading videos to holding a championship belt. The parody was tracking a career that had already left YouTube behind. The response in the real world was the part that settles this section's argument. On December 21st, the day after the special dropped, Logan Paul posted a recreation of the Cred commercial, performing his cartoon counterpart's monologue and substituting the actual product name, and thanked South Park for the cred. KSI also responded positively to the parody of his creator career. The show had spent 47 minutes arguing that this product was being marketed to children by people who knew better, and within 24 hours, the target had converted the satire into a promotional post. The parody became inventory too. The product itself did not last. In the first quarter of 2024, Prime's sales in the United Kingdom fell by roughly half against the same period the year before. Photographs circulated of bottles on clearance at 31 pence, a price below the cost of the plastic they came in. In April of that year, a class action alleged that the drink contained excessive caffeine and and industrial chemicals. Allegations Paul publicly denied. Later reporting described a fall from the reported billion-dollar peak toward a fraction of it. South Park had hit the brand 6 weeks after its high point, which is about as good as satire timing gets. There is one more piece of context that belongs here, and it involves the show. The special existed because in August of 2021, Parker and Stone signed a deal reported at $900 million, extending the series through 2027 and committing them to a run of Paramount Plus exclusives that the studio advertised as 14 feature films. Parker and Stone later said the projects were not films and that the decision to market them that way had been the studio's. So the story about a drink sold to children through a chain of intermediaries nobody could see the top of was itself a streaming exclusive, produced under a 9-figure agreement, advertised to the public as something its own creators said it was not. The bottle starts the special as contraband, an empty container bought on a black market by a boy who wanted other children to see him holding it. It ends the special full again, salvaged from a bin, handed over as a gift, and greeted with applause. And in the real world, within 18 months of the episode airing, the same object was sitting in a clearance bin in Britain at 31 pence, worth less than the plastic, having briefly been the most valuable thing a 4th grader could carry. Nothing about the drink had changed in that time. The only thing that had moved was where the attention went next. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The parody is embraced by its target and reused as advertising within a day. 2 years later, the money moved again, off the shelves and onto a microphone, and the 4th grader running it had a weekly figure to hit and no interest in what he was saying. Section 3. Charlie Kirk Cartman, standing at South Park Elementary, has always depended on being the one boy willing to say the unsayable, and he has never charged anybody for it. Then a classmate started doing the same thing into a microphone, with sponsors attached and a weekly target to hit. Cartman spent the episode fighting to take back an act he considered his property, until the thing he was defending turned out to have a price on it. Got a Nut premiered on August 6, 2025, and it opens in a school hallway with 3 children furious about a podcast. Wendy, Stan, and Kyle are talking about somebody who has been saying offensive things on a show, and Cartman walks up and asks who they mean. When they tell him it is Clyde, he cannot process it. Then he hears Kyle call Clyde a fat ass, which is the insult that has belonged to Cartman for the entire run of the series, and the confusion becomes something closer to alarm. That opening beat is the engine of the whole section. Cartman already has a podcast. He has been running the act for years, and he assumed the anger in that hallway was aimed at him, because being the object of that anger is his position in the school, and always has been. Nobody is talking about him. The outrage he considers his has been redirected to a boy whose defining trait for 26 seasons has been that he is upset about something and nobody is listening. The shape of that humiliation is specific. Cartman is not being censored or shut down in this episode. He is being ignored. His show exists, he is still making it, and the school has simply found a more current version of the same product and given it their attention instead. For a character whose entire operating principle is that everyone in the room must react to him, being replaced by an inferior copy is a worse outcome than being punished, and the episode understands that perfectly. He spends the first act not defending a position, but trying to establish that he was here first. Clyde walks into the hallway and gets booed. Students throw things at him. His response is not to apologize or to back down, and it is not to argue either. He invites them to come on the podcast and debate him. That is the moment the episode establishes what kind of business this is. The hostility is not an obstacle to the show. The hostility is the show, and every person shouting at him in that corridor is a potential episode. Kyle and Wendy tell him to stop saying divisive things, which from Clyde's position is a request to stop working. That invitation is also the real-world format the episode is built on. The figure Cartman is parodying had made his name largely through filmed debates with students, in which the value of the encounter came from the confrontation rather than from any conclusion, and the clips traveled because somebody got upset on camera. Clyde has reproduced that model inside a primary school with no equipment and no staff. Anybody who objects to what he says is invited to object on the show, which converts every critic into content and makes the objection itself the product being sold to sponsors. Then he gets sent to the counselor's office and states the number. Mr. Mackey wants to understand why he is saying these things, and Clyde explains that saying divisive things on the podcast helps him reach his nut, which is $60 a week. That is the entire motive. Not politics, not conviction, not a movement. A 4th grader has a weekly figure he needs to cover, and has worked out that a certain kind of talk brings it in. The most inflammatory voice in the school is a boy meeting a budget. The conversation is interrupted by PC principal coming in to tell Mackey he has been fired because government funding has been cut, and that is where the episode's other half begins. Mackey ends up taking a job with immigration enforcement, follows the raids, earns himself a bonus, and then learns from from his bank that his monthly outgoings have gone up anyway. His plot runs on exactly the same logic as Clyde's. A man is short of money, finds work that requires him to do things he would not otherwise do, does them well, gets paid, and remains short of money. The episode puts the two of them in the same building at the same moment, one being told to stop talking, and one being told his job no longer exists, and sends both of them out to earn. Neither storyline is about conviction. Both are about a weekly figure that has to be covered by somebody, and about what people will agree to say and do once that figure is the only thing that matters. Clyde's next episode opens with him welcoming everybody to what he calls the Channel of Truth, followed immediately by a set of statements about Jewish people, white people, and women that are designed to be as offensive as he can manage in one breath. Then he brings on his first guest, and the guest is Cartman, who sits there looking irritated rather than impressed. Cartman's complaint is not that any of it is wrong. His complaint is ownership. He tells Clyde that this is his shtick, that Clyde has stolen his idea, and that he needs to knock it off. Clyde responds by changing the subject to the sponsors he has picked up, which lands far harder than any argument would have. And while Cartman is sitting there as a guest, Clyde runs a hashtag telling the audience to respect Clyde's authority, built directly out of Cartman's own catchphrase. The sponsors are the real injury. Cartman has been performing this material since he was 8 years old, for free, in classrooms and living rooms and at bus stops, and the total commercial value of it across his entire life has been nothing. Clyde started a few weeks ago and has advertisers. The gap between them is not talent or nerve, because Clyde is plainly a worse version of the act. The gap is that one of them noticed there was a market, and the other one was just being himself. Cartman handles it the way Cartman handles things. He beats Clyde up and takes the podcast. Then he runs his own version, taking calls from the public and describing what he does as master debating, to the point where his mother, hearing him going at it from across the hallway, gets told that is what he is up to. And then he explains how the show is made. Cartman admits that when he records the podcast, he edits out the people who can actually argue well with him, so that he comes off better. That is the reveal the whole section has been building toward, and it takes about 5 seconds. Every episode of his show is a fight he has already won in the edit. The callers who beat him exist. They called in, they made their points, and they are removed before anybody hears them. That admission runs straight back through this entire video. 11 years earlier, in the same show, Cartman built a channel whose product was commentary about other people's commentary, an act with no underlying content at all, and told Mr. Garrison it was the way of the future. He was right. The 2025 version has a microphone, a hashtag, sponsors, and an audience, and the thing underneath it is still nothing. The authority was never argument, and the format never required one. It required an edit. Clyde then wins an award. It is called the Charlie Kirk Award for Young Master Debaters. It comes with a free holiday attached, and it goes to the boy who stole the act, rather than to the boy who invented it. Cartman is outraged all over again, which is the correct ending, because there is no version of this story where he gets the trophy. The holiday is the detail that stings, because Clyde started all of this to cover $60 a week, and has ended up with a prize worth considerably more than the shortfall that drove him into it. The market did not reward the belief, since he never had one, and it did not reward the quality either. It rewarded the person who arrived at the format last and packaged it best. That award is where the section circle closes, and it closes tightly. Cartman in this episode is a parody of Charlie Kirk, a real podcaster who had built an enormous audience out of filmed campus debates. The award handed to Clyde is named after that same real person. So a cartoon character based on a real commentator loses a prize named after the real commentator to a classmate imitating the cartoon character. The show is not being subtle about the loop, and it does not need to be, because the episode is openly about that loop. Much of it turns on Cartman taking offense at online grifters stealing his ideas and his gimmick, and debate bro culture had been mocked for years by that point for resembling Cartman. South Park spent almost 2 decades pointing at internet creators from the outside, and in 2025 it stopped pretending. The format was assembled out of one of its own characters. Cartman was the prototype, and the internet mass-produced him, and the show finally wrote an episode about the copyright claim he cannot make. Charlie Kirk saw the episode and liked it. He said publicly that his portrayal through Cartman was hilarious, which continues the pattern established in the previous 2 sections, where the target treats being satirized by South Park as a good thing rather than a wound. That makes 3 in a row. The influencer parodied over a hydration drink remade his own parody as an advertisement and thanked the show. The creator listed as a suggested profile in an adult content plot celebrated the mention publicly, and the commentator whose act was handed to Cartman called the portrayal hilarious. Across the 3 most recent sections of this video, every named target welcomed the satire, which is a complete reversal of what being mocked by South Park used to mean. The show that once ended careers by drawing them had become a promotional channel for the people it was attacking, and the people it was attacking noticed before it did. Then the story stopped being about television. On September 10th, 2025, Charlie Charlie Kirk was assassinated. That same day, Comedy Central pulled Gotta Nut from its cable rotation, though the episode remained available on Paramount Plus and for digital purchase. The show also delayed a subsequent episode. A satire of a living public figure had become something else entirely within 5 weeks of broadcast, and the response was to take it off the schedule it had been made for, while leaving it in the place where most of the audience actually watches. What remains is the number. $60 a week is the whole thing, stated out loud in a counselor's office by a child who is not an ideologue and never claimed to be. He is not radicalized and he has not been recruited. He found out what pays, and what pays is being the most objectionable person in the room, and the amount required to keep him doing it would not cover a phone bill. Cartman spent the episode trying to reclaim an act he thought made him special, and the market price of that act, established on screen by a fourth grader, is $60. The format Clyde borrowed had a real commercial engine behind it, and the engine was the argument rather than the outcome. Filmed confrontations travel because somebody loses composure on camera, which means the person running the show benefits from every hostile question and loses nothing by being wrong. A studio is not required, neither is research. What is required is a steady supply of people willing to object in public, and a school hallway supplies that for nothing. Clyde worked all of it out with a microphone and no budget at 9 years old because the model does not need anything else. Mackey's half of the episode runs on the same arithmetic, and it runs further than one scene. Losing the counseling job to a funding cut leaves him with no income and nothing obvious to sell, so he takes work with immigration enforcement, and the episode sends him out on operations that get steadily less plausible, including a raid on a children's stage show and eventually one conducted in heaven. He is good at the job. He earns a bonus for it. Then his bank informs him that his monthly outgoings have gone up, which cancels the bonus out and leaves him precisely where he started. He did everything the work asked of him and finished the episode no better off than the morning he was fired. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Clyde's $60 comes from sponsors, which means somebody is still standing between him and the money. In the same town, 2 years earlier, Randy Marsh found a way to remove that person entirely, and his wife noticed. Section 4. Tana Mojo. By 2023, a creator could skip advertisers completely and charge the audience directly, which made the middleman look like the only thing that had ever been in the way. South Park put that arrangement inside one Colorado marriage and turned it into a competition. The last barrier between a creator and a paycheck came down inside that house, and one member of the Marsh family turned out to be far better at it than the other. The other half of Not Suitable for Children starts with somebody losing a job. A local art teacher in South Park has been posting on OnlyFans, a subscription platform where subscribers pay a creator directly for content, and once that becomes known to the parents at the school, she is gone. Randy Marsh watches all of this happen and draws the opposite conclusion from everybody else in town. If a school teacher could do it, so could he. The teacher is the one part of that plot taken straight from the news. In the years before the special aired, a run of teachers in several countries had turned to the platform for additional income, and a number of them were fired or resigned once parents found out and complained to their schools. The stories followed a consistent shape in every case. The work was legal, the work was done off school grounds and outside working hours, and the moment a single parent recognized a face, the job ended. South Park spent about 90 seconds on that setup and then moved on to Randy, but the setup is the reason the plot has any weight, because the teacher is the only person in the story who loses something for being on the platform. Randy starts making videos, and the mechanics are the whole point. There is no advertiser involved. There is no platform selling his audience to a brand. No ad rate, no sponsor, and no negotiation. Subscribers pay him, and he receives the money. Every previous section of this video has been about the gap between an audience and a payment, and this arrangement closes that gap completely. It is the most direct commercial relationship in the entire history of internet content, and it arrives in the story as a man in his 40s deciding to take his trousers off in the family home. Sharon disapproves, which is where it becomes interesting. Instead of arguing about it, she opens an account of her own, and hers does considerably better than his. She gains thousands of subscribers. The money comes in fast enough to buy an enormous quantity of luxury goods for herself, none of which she had to ask anybody's permission to purchase, and the household ends up with two competing businesses selling to overlapping audiences. Randy is not beaten by a corporation or a platform or an algorithm. He is beaten by his wife in his own house, using the same tool he brought home. That competition tells you what kind of market this is. There are no gatekeepers to persuade, so there is nothing to be good at except attracting subscribers, and the person who attracts more of them wins. Randy has been the town's most reliable engine of ambition for 2 decades, always convinced that the next scheme is the one, and the platform hands him a business where effort and cleverness count for almost nothing against the raw question of who people want to pay. The named creator in this section arrives on a screen inside that plot. When Randy's OnlyFans OnlyFans page is shown, the suggested profiles listed alongside his include Tana Mojo and an adult performer, both of whom had real accounts on the platform. It is a background detail that lasts a couple of seconds, and it is the mechanism by which a real, working creator ends up inside the episode without a line of dialogue or a drawn character. By December of 2023, she was one of the more instructive figures in the creator economy, and the reason has little to do with the platform she was listed on. She had built an audience of more than 5 million on YouTube and a comparable following on Instagram. In 2018, she tried to run her own convention as a rival to the industry's biggest one, and it collapsed on the first day over overcrowding and safety concerns, which drew mass criticism and looked at the time like the end of the story. The convention is the closest thing in these 10 stories to a creator discovering the limits of an audience. She announced her own event in California as an alternative to the industry's established convention, and enormous numbers of people came. The organization could not carry them. Attendees were left standing outside in serious heat for hours. The safety situation became untenable, and the whole thing was shut down on day one, which turned a show of strength into a case study. Every account of her career published since has led with it. She had proved she could summon a crowd, and then proved she could not hold one, and both facts came out of the same weekend. The following year, she won the Streamy Award for Creator of the Year, beating Mr. Beast and Emma Chamberlain. On July 9th, 2023, 5 months before the special aired, Forbes profiled her as somebody building an 8-figure business spread across product lines, a podcast she co-hosted, subscription revenue, and her own talent agency, Tana's Angels, operating as a division of a larger one. None of the businesses named in that profile is a video. There were consumer product lines under her own brands, a beverage venture and a cannabis venture. There was a podcast, there was subscription revenue, and there was a talent agency operating under her name as a division of a larger agency, which put her on the other side of the table from the creators she had come up alongside. The through line is the same one running through the previous section. By 2023, the successful version of being a YouTuber involved owning things, and the videos had become the marketing department. Her own account of how that worked runs opposite to the passive picture most of these stories have described. She told Forbes that people are going to underestimate a woman in almost everything, and that she had to claw her way up harder than most men would, and she added that if she had been cookie cutter, she would never have amassed any success, and that had she switched to being a perfectly brand-safe businesswoman, she did not think she would have got where she is. That is somebody describing a strategy, not somebody describing weather. Almost nobody who went viral in the internet's first decade had a strategy available to them. She had one, and it involved deliberately staying difficult to package. Her response to the cameo followed the pattern this video established one section ago. Members of her own subreddit noticed the reference before most viewers did, and she posted publicly about it with obvious delight, treating an appearance as a suggested profile in an animated pornography subplot as a career highlight. Logan Paul had rebuilt his own parody as an advertisement within a day. She did roughly the same thing with 2 seconds of background text. By 2023, being satirized by South Park had become a form of promotion rather than a form of punishment, and the creators worked that out considerably faster than the show did. Back inside the plot, Randy's problem is that he wants more subscribers, so he does the thing every creator in this story eventually does, and attaches himself to whatever is trending. What is trending in South Park is cred, the drink the 4th graders are fighting over, so he starts putting it in his videos. That single decision fuses the two halves of the special. The adult content plot and the children's status economy stop being separate stories at the moment Randy reaches for the same product his son's classmates are rioting over. Sharon notices the consequence before he does. She raises the concern that the views on his videos appear to be coming from minors and asks him to stop. He refuses, and the refusal is left completely unresolved in the moment. He does not argue that she is wrong, and he does not check. He is behind on subscribers, the trending topic is working, and the person who might be watching is somebody else's problem. What he does next is walk directly into the machinery. An influence agent explains to him how the business actually operates, describing how sponsors bid against each other for the right to have the top influencers promote their products, and Randy goes to the auction where that influence is sold to the highest bidder. He has gone looking for the version of the internet with no middleman in it, and the place that search leads him is a room where his attention is a lot being sold to strangers. The FBI arrests him there. The special makes a pun out of the word at that moment, and he agrees to cooperate. One detail connects Randy's auction to everything happening in the other half of the special. The man running that auction is the same man who kills Logan LaDouche. When the FBI takes the sniper off the rooftop, the shooter turns out to be the auctioneer, and he is not the power either, only a middleman standing between the sponsors and the people whose audiences are being sold. So the room Randy walked into for a business opportunity is the room the children were trying to trace when they went looking for the top of the chain. Two plots that reviewers found unrelated share a single antagonist, and he is somebody neither side can get past. The lesson Randy draws from all of it is the closest thing the special has to a straight statement, and it arrives while he is throwing away every bottle of cred in his house. He tells the children that the social media industry is not suitable for children, that they need to understand they are always being targeted, and that they need to know who wants to influence them the most. It is a good warning, delivered with total sincerity by the man who kept the trending topic in his videos after being told minors were watching. South Park does not clean that contradiction up, and it should not. Randy is not a hypocrite who gets exposed. He is a man who did something for money, got caught in the machinery underneath it, understood the shape of that machinery better than anyone else in town by the end, and delivered an accurate warning about it while never quite accounting for his own part. The show has been building him that way for 20 years. He learns the correct thing and remains exactly who he was. Not everybody thought the two halves belonged together. Reviewers at the time argued that the OnlyFans subplot felt like it had wandered in from a different program, that Stan was barely in the special at all, and that Randy's story sat awkwardly beside the story about his son's classmates. That criticism is fair about the tone and wrong about the structure, because the two plots are describing the same transaction from opposite ends. One is about children being sold a product by people who deny selling it to children. The other is about an adult selling directly to an audience he refuses to identify. Both are about somebody choosing not to ask who is on the other side. The structural point underneath the whole section is how little is left standing. By 2023, the machinery between a creator and a payment had been stripped down to nothing at all. No advertiser, no sponsor, no negotiated split, no intermediary of any kind. A person posts something, other people pay, and the money lands the same day. Every barrier that had once made internet fame worthless was gone, and it had all gone in under 20 years. What that arrangement cannot do is tell the creator who is on the other side of it. Sharon asks the question directly, and the answer is not available anywhere in the system, because the system was built to move money quickly rather than to verify who is sending it. The advertiser everybody wanted out of the way had at least been a party with a name attached. Direct payment removed the middleman and, in the same motion, removed the only participant anybody could identify. The suggested profiles screen appears for a moment on a cartoon phone in a Colorado bedroom, listing real people who really were on the platform, in an episode whose hardest unresolved question is who exactly is paying. One of those real people saw her own name in it and celebrated. Nobody watching the episode, including the man in it, could say who was on the other end of a single subscription, and the money kept arriving regardless. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. None of this machinery existed when South Park first went after internet creators. 15 years earlier, the show built a government office to pay them, filled the waiting room with real people, and handed out checks you could see straight through. One of them took it to court. Section 5. Samwell. In 2007, a low-budget music video shot in Milwaukee became one of the most forwarded things on the early internet. A year later, a cartoon rebuilt it move for move, with Butters in the costumes. What followed was an attempt by the company that owned the original to make South Park pay for the copy, and an answer that came out of a federal courtroom 4 years later. Canada on Strike reached television on April 2, 2008, and the story begins with Mr. Mackey showing his class a video for Canada Appreciation Day. The presentation asks the students to remember everything Canada has given the world, and the class mocks it immediately. Much of the rest of the world reacts the same way, so the president of the World Canadian Bureau announces that the entire country will go on strike. At a meeting of world leaders, he explains what Canada wants, which turns out to be money from the internet. The other delegates try to tell him that money cannot simply be handed over that way, and he storms out of the room. The strike begins, and it reaches South Park within a day, because Ike starts picketing outside the Broflovsky house, while Terrence and Philip goes into reruns. The boys care about the reruns far more than the politics. With their favorite show off the air, they call the World Canadian Bureau themselves, and agree that Canada probably does deserve more money, which leaves them with a problem, because none of them has any money to give. Their solution is the one that felt obvious in 2008. They decide to make a video, put it on the internet, and collect the earnings. The video they choose to make is a recreation of What in the Butt, a song and clip that had been circulating for about a year already. Butters performs it, the costumes match, the moves match, and the boys treat the plan as ordinary business rather than a gag, because as far as they understand the internet, becoming popular and getting paid are the same event. The original had gone online on February 14, 2007. It was made in Milwaukee by two filmmakers, Andrew Swant and Bobby Ciraldo, working under the name Brown Mark Films, for a song by a performer known as Samwell. The production was small and the setting was ordinary, a suburban stretch of the city that had nothing to do with the content of the song. It premiered at a Milwaukee gallery and went up on YouTube a few days later, and the day after that, a gossip blog with an enormous readership linked to it, followed by a cable clip show. From there, it moved the way things moved in 2007, forwarded through email chains and message boards and comment sections until the phrase was recognizable to people who had never sat through the whole video. By April of 2008, Samwell had appeared on a British television program for an interview and a live performance with backing dancers. Brownmark's own account of that period puts the clip at close to 9 million downloads before South Park ever touched it. Inside the episode, the recreation works exactly as the boys expect. The video spreads, people across the internet watch it on their computers, and the boys treat the response as confirmation that their money is now waiting somewhere, so they travel to collect it. The place they go is the Colorado Department of Internet Money, a government office built like any other government office, with a counter, a clerk, and a room full of chairs. The joke of the building is that it exists at all, and the joke of the room is who is already sitting in it. Every chair is taken by somebody whose video the audience would recognize on sight, and every one of them arrived for the same reason the boys did. The queue is where the episode does its real work. Tay Zonday is there. So are Afro Ninja, the sneezing panda and its mother, the laughing baby, the dramatic look gopher, Chris Crocker, Tron Guy, the Star Wars kid, and the Numa Numa guy, with Bub Rub and the Backdorm boys sitting further back and staying out of what follows. None of them is being paid yet. All of them are waiting. The only thing available to them in that room is position. So an argument starts about which of them is the most famous, and the argument turns physical, and then it turns lethal. Most of the applicants kill each other while the boys stand off to one side, untouched, watching a room full of internet celebrities destroy itself over a ranking that has no cash value attached to it. Then the clerk pays them. The boys receive 10 million theoretical dollars, printed on transparent plastic checks. The money is not withheld, and the office is not a fraud. The payment is real, in the sense that it is handed over, and the paperwork is complete, and it is also worth nothing, because there was never any mechanism behind the promise. The boys leave holding a check they can hold up and see the room through, which is the same thing everybody else in that waiting room had been sitting for. The rest of the episode plays that idea out at national scale. The strike drags on, Canadians begin dying of starvation, and the United States brings in Danish workers to fill the empty jobs. The boys offer the theoretical dollars to the World Canadian Bureau, and the offer is refused outright as worthless, which is the one moment in the episode where somebody looks at internet money and correctly identifies what it is. Kyle solves the standoff by persuading the world leaders to give Canada a consolation prize instead, so that the strike can end with the appearance of a win. The prize is bubblegum and restaurant coupons. Terrence and Philip later work out the numbers and report that Canada lost $10.4 million in wages by not working, against a prize worth roughly $3,008. The Canadians respond by putting their own leader on an ice floe and pushing him out to sea. That arithmetic is the episode's actual argument, and it is stated in wages rather than in theory. A country stopped working to demand money from the internet, and the internet produced gum. Kyle closes the story by noting how difficult it is for people who make things to earn anything from putting them online. In 2008, that was a joke about a strike. It was also a claim about how the whole system worked, and the show had put 10 real names in a waiting room to support it. The strike at the center of the episode was not invented either. Hollywood writers had walked out between 2007 and 2008, and one of the largest issues on the table was how they would be paid once their work moved onto the internet. South Park came at that fight from an unusual angle. Parker and Stone were not members of the Writers Union, and they had already negotiated their own share of internet profits before the question turned into a union problem. So the episode gives the demand to a country instead of to a writer's room, and lets that country ask for money from the internet without being able to say who is supposed to hand it over. On the commentary track for the season, the two of them describe the episode as a docudrama rather than a parody of the strike, which works as a joke and also as a fairly plain statement of what they thought of the negotiation. 2.5 years later, somebody tested the claim in court. In November of 2010, Brownmark Films sued over the recreation, naming comedy partners, MTV Networks, Paramount Home Entertainment, Viacom International, and South Park Digital Studios as defendants. The complaint was straightforward copyright infringement. Brownmark held the copyright in the original video. South Park had rebuilt that video shot for shot without permission, and the episode had gone out on cable and then stayed available for years afterward. The suit arrived long enough after broadcast that the episode had already been released on home video. One detail in that case matters for the rest of this story. Samwell did not sue. The performer whose face and voice carried the original video, the man who had done the interviews and the live performances and the appearances, was not the party in court. The plaintiff was Brownmark Films, the company set up by the two filmmakers who directed and produced the clip. Ownership of the video and authorship of the fame it created had already come apart. The person the audience knew and the entity that could file a claim were different, and only one of them had standing to ask for money. The case did not survive long. On July 6, 2011, a federal district judge in the Eastern District of Wisconsin dismissed it before the parties had even reached discovery. The defense had attached both videos to its motion, arguing that anyone who watched them back to back could see the South Park version creation was a parody protected by fair use. The judge agreed, calling it a classic parody, and threw the case out on the pleadings. Ordinarily, fair use is a fact-heavy question that courts prefer to work through slowly, with evidence and argument on both sides. Here, the judge decided the two videos were the only evidence the question required. Brownmark appealed to the Seventh Circuit, and its central argument was procedural rather than creative. It said that fair use cannot be decided on a motion to dismiss, no matter how obvious the answer looks, because that is not what motions to dismiss are for. The Electronic Frontier Foundation filed a brief on the other side, arguing that forcing every obvious parody through full litigation would encourage weak lawsuits and chill the work of anyone who makes commentary for a living. The appeal turned into a question about how quickly a court is allowed to recognize a joke, and the answer would apply to far more than one music video, because no appeals court had yet approved throwing out a copyright claim that early on fair use grounds. On June 7, 2012, the Seventh Circuit affirmed the dismissal, and the reasoning went considerably further than the outcome. The court noted that Brownmark had actually given up its fair use argument on appeal by failing to address the substance of it. Then it went further and said that even if the argument had been made properly, the South Park version was clearly fair use. Its explanation of why turned on money. Brownmark had never made any concrete claim that the episode reduced what the original video earned. The court observed that any loss here could only be measured in internet dollars of no real commercial value, and that South Park drawing attention to the clip would, if anything, have increased the advertising revenue the original earned on YouTube. The appeals court also described the lower court's opinion as well-reasoned and delightful, which is an unusual thing to find in a copyright ruling. A federal appeals court had arrived at the same conclusion the cartoon reached as a punchline. The episode invented an office that paid viral stars in money you could see through, and 4 years later, 3 judges looked at a real claim over a real viral video and found that the loss could only be counted in a currency with no measurable value. The show was not making a prediction on purpose, it was making fun of a strike. The ruling landed on the same number anyway. Nothing about the outcome slowed Samwell down. He kept working the way the era allowed, with a merchandise line, a safer sex video, an appearance on a Comedy Central show built entirely around viral clips, and a feature film that was announced repeatedly and never arrived. Brownmark's own promotional material tells the story of the South Park recreation as part of the video's success, rather than as an injury, listing the episode alongside the blog post and the clip show as one of the things that pushed the view count higher. The company that sued over the parody had already been describing the parody as good for business. The transparent check is the object that carries all of it. Inside the episode, it is a piece of paper you can hold up and see the room through, handed to 4 boys who did the work, made the thing, and got paid in a currency that does not exist. Outside the episode, the people who owned the original video went to 2 federal courts to argue that the recreation had cost them something, and came away with a ruling that any loss could only be counted in the same way. The boys walk out of the Department of Internet Money holding proof of payment and nothing else, which turned out to be an accurate description of what the early internet handed the people who made it worth watching. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A federal court eventually settled what that recreation was worth, and the line the boys stood in was already full of people waiting on the same promise. The most recognizable voice in that room had spent the previous summer buried in offers he had no idea how to answer. Section 6. Tay Zonday. In the summer of 2007, the most forwarded thing on the internet was a homemade music video, and almost everybody sharing it treated the man in it as a joke. A cartoon seated that singer in a government waiting room and made him argue about who deserved to be paid first. The biggest voice of that summer ended up as the angriest person in the line. Chocolate Rain went up on YouTube on April 23, 2007, and the man who uploaded it was Adam Bonner, a graduate student living in Minnesota. The video is close to nothing on paper. He sits in a small room in front of a camera, leans into a microphone, and sings a song he wrote himself, turning his head away at intervals so the breath does not hit the equipment. He put a note on screen explaining that he was moving away from the microphone to breathe in, and that note became almost as famous as the song. The voice is far lower than his appearance leads people to expect, and that gap is the thing most viewers noticed before anything else. For the first stretch after it went online, almost nobody watched it at all. He was not a performer by trade. He was born Adam Nerer Bonner in Chicago, the youngest of 3 children, with 2 parents who taught for a living. He attended a residential public school in Illinois for highly gifted students and left before graduating, then finished his degree at Evergreen State College in 2004. He wrote Chocolate Rain as a graduate student in his mid-20s, and he had invented the name Tay Zonday earlier in 2007 as a stage identity, expecting to keep his own name for the rest of his life. The plan was ordinary and reasonable. One name for the performing, one name for everything else. By July of 2007, the plan had stopped working. The video video became one of the defining internet objects of that summer, forwarded through email and message boards, embedded on blogs, and reposted faster than anybody could track. It also became a template. People remade it, dubbed over it, cut it into other videos, and turned the line about moving away from the microphone into a running gag that traveled independently of the song. Within a few weeks, the phrase "Chocolate Rain" was recognizable to enormous numbers of people who had never watched the video from start to finish and could not have said what it was about. By the time South Park used him, nearly everybody else had used him first. The song had been remade, dubbed over, sped up, slowed down, and cut into other people's videos for the better part of a year, and the joke had detached from the man completely. That is the condition the episode found him in. It did not invent the idea of treating him as a punchline, and it was not the first place he was drawn as a figure rather than a person. It was one entry in a long line, arriving at the point where the process had already been running for a year, while the man at the center of it had said nothing at all about what any of it meant. The offers arrived at the same speed. Over a period of weeks that summer, he did dozens of radio interviews. He fielded hundreds of separate approaches from people who wanted to co-write books with him, sign him to major music labels, book him for private events, and attach his name to products. There was no infrastructure for any of this in 2007. He has since described the period plainly, saying it all happened very suddenly, that his brother stepped in to act as a manager and caretaker, and that the two of them were overwhelmed anyway. The volume was the problem. Every message was an opportunity, and none of them came with instructions. He said yes to a great deal of it. He has joked that at the time, he did not know how to say no, so he took as many of the performance requests as he could physically manage, which is the natural response when hundreds of strangers are telling you that a window is closing. Commentators were already predicting the window would close. A Minneapolis writer said in August of 2007 that she could not imagine the video had much shelf life left in it. The advice coming from every direction was to move quickly, and moving quickly meant accepting bookings that a working musician with a plan and a manager would have turned down without much thought. The television bookings followed. He appeared on Jimmy Kimmel twice and opened for Girl Talk at First Avenue in Minneapolis, which are the kinds of dates that look like a career starting. He has talked about what those rooms were actually like for him. When the curtain came up on the Kimmel appearance and the crowd screamed, he felt crushed, and in his own description, like a ghost in his own body. He was diagnosed as a teenager with what was then called Asperger's, now understood as autism, and he has said that at the time he went viral, he did not grasp how much that mattered, and was living through a great deal of sensory difficulty without connecting any of it together. He moved to Los Angeles to be closer to whatever was going to happen next. That was the standard advice for anybody with an audience and no clear plan, and there was nothing else to go on. He has pointed out since that there were no examples available to him. Nobody had done this yet, so he could not look at another person's career and ask what they had done at the same moment. Chocolate Rain was one of the first videos to make a private individual famous at that scale, which meant the person it happened to was also the test case. The ground itself was new in a way that is easy to forget now. He has pointed out that in 2007, MySpace was still the biggest thing in social media, which is a useful reminder of how early all of this was. YouTube was 2 years old and had only recently been bought by Google. The word viral was still being explained inside news segments rather than assumed. He has said there were no breadcrumbs for him to follow because he could not ask what somebody else had done at the same point in their own story. The creators who would eventually build long careers out of that platform were still in school. Every decision he made that summer was a first attempt, taken under pressure, by a man who had gone to bed one night as a graduate student in Minnesota and woken up as the punchline of the season. Canada on Strike put him on television 9 months later, on April 2nd, 2008, and it did not put him on a stage. It put him in a queue. When the boys arrive at the Colorado Department of Internet Money to collect the earnings from their video, the waiting room is already full, and Tay Zonday is the most recognizable person sitting in it. The show draws him accurately, in the same clothes, with the same posture, waiting for a clerk to call his number. He is not there as a musician. He is there as a claimant, filed alongside a laughing baby, a sneezing panda, and a man in a homemade costume, all of them holding the same expectation that fame converts into money if you sit long enough. Nobody in that room is paid while the room is on screen. What happens instead is an argument, and the argument is about ranking, because ranking is the only thing the room actually contains. The applicants begin comparing themselves to each other over who is the most famous, the comparison escalates, and it becomes violent. Zonday is the one who ends it. He pulls a gun and shoots several of the other people waiting, including the sneezing panda's mother and the boy holding the golf club, before he is killed himself by the dramatic look gopher. The boys stand off to one side and are never touched. The scene ends with a transaction that excludes him entirely. The clerk calls the boys forward and hands over 10 million theoretical dollars printed on transparent plastic, and they walk out of the building holding proof of payment. Zonday is on the floor by then, along with most of the room. His claim is never processed and never mentioned again. Nobody in that waiting room is shown receiving anything at all. all, which means the only people the Colorado Department of Internet Money ever pays are 4 children who made one video as a favor to Canada. The applicants, who had been sitting there long enough to start fighting each other, are still waiting when the story moves on without them. Of everybody in that waiting room, the show gives him the most to do, and what he does with it is settle a status dispute rather than get anywhere near a payment. That is a fair reading of what the room was offering. There was no money in the building. There was a counter, a clerk, and a set of chairs occupied by people whose only asset was being better known than the person sitting next to them, so the fight that broke out was the only fight available. The episode is unkind about it and also accurate about it. There is something the episode does not know about him, and it is the part that reframes everything else. Chocolate Rain was not written as a novelty. He wrote it as a ballad about institutional racism, and the song is about that subject from the first line to the last. Almost nobody who shared it in 2007 understood that, because the delivery and the voice and the note about the microphone gave people an easier thing to react to. He made a decision about it at the time, and held to that decision for a decade. He chose not to publicly explain what the song meant until 2017, and he has said the reason may have been that it did not feel safe to, and that the world had grown up a good deal by the time he did. So the man South Park cast as the angriest claimant in a line for internet money spent 10 years watching his own work circulate as a joke while saying nothing about what it was. And the money itself never arrived in the way the cue implied it would. He has been unusually direct about that side of it, saying that some of the Los Angeles years got quite lean financially, and that his parents bailed him out. He added the part most people leave out, which is that plenty of people who get bailed out by family never admit it. The biggest video of the summer of 2007 did not cover his rent, and the person who covered it was his mother and father. That is the real accounting behind the transparent check. The episode invented an office that hands over money you can see through, and the actual figure for one of the people in that waiting room was a phone call home. The gum and coupons Canada accepted at the end of the episode were a joke about a country that stopped working for nothing. The version of it in Zonde's account is smaller and harder because the audience was real, the reach was real, the offers were real, and the structure underneath all of it still left him short. None of that ended his connection to the video. Chocolate Rain now sits at roughly 142 million views with more than 450,000 comments, which is a larger audience than most television shows will ever reach, and he has called it a defining moment for YouTube itself rather than only for him. He gave a long interview about the whole period in 2022 and appeared on a national daytime talk show in January of 2025, still answering questions about a 5-minute song from 2007. He has kept talking about it, and each time he does, he adds another piece of what was happening underneath the version everybody remembers. The name is what carries the section. He built Tay Zonde as a role, a separate identity meant to keep the performing at arm's length from Adam Bonner. Then the role became the famous thing, and people started addressing him as Tay in business and in ordinary life, and he has described being unsure whether it was a part he had to play or simply who he was. The waiting room in the cartoon is full of people identified by a video rather than a name. He is the one who built the second name himself, on purpose, for protection, and then had to live inside it while a government office made of jokes offered him money that did not exist. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The most recognizable voice in that room ends up shooting the people beside him over a payment nobody has received. The man sitting next to him had gone viral 3 years earlier for something he recorded alone at his computer and never meant for anybody outside his own address book. Section 7. Gary Brolsma. In December of 2004, a teenager in New Jersey sat down at his webcam, mimed along to a Romanian pop song for a minute and a half, and put the clip online for his friends. 4 years later, a cartoon still recognized him well enough to seat him in a line of people demanding payment. One of the internet's first famous faces ended up in a queue for money he had never asked anybody for. The Numa Numa dance went up on December 6, 2004, on Newgrounds, under the username Gman250. Gary Brolsma was 18, living in Saddlebrook, New Jersey, and had graduated from a technical high school in Teterboro that June. He has said the video took him about 15 minutes to make, start to finish. There was nowhere else to put it. YouTube did not exist yet in any meaningful form, so Newgrounds, a clearinghouse for online video and animation, was the natural place for a homemade clip, and the people there voted on what they liked. Within a few days, it was on the front page. The video itself is almost nothing, which is part of why it worked. He wears headphones and lip syncs to Dragostea Din Te by the Moldovan group Ozone, a song whose title translates roughly as Love from the Linden Trees. He flails his arms, cocks an eyebrow, mouths the words with total commitment, and never once gets out of the chair. That last detail matters more than it sounds, because everything the audience found funny happens inside a space about the width of a desk. He is not performing for a crowd. He is sitting at a computer in a bedroom in New Jersey, enjoying a song, with a webcam pointed at his face. He had found the song in the first place through another piece of internet nonsense. Before he ever set up the webcam, he came across Dragostea Dinte inside a Japanese flash animation featuring cartoon cats, which is how a Moldovan pop record reached a teenager in New Jersey in 2004. He liked it enough to want to perform it, and the performance was intended for people he knew. That is the entire origin of one of the most reproduced videos in internet history. A flash cartoon with singing cats, a song in a language he did not speak, and a boy who thought a few friends would find it funny. From the Newgrounds front page, it went everywhere, and it went there faster than anyone had a name for. Parodists started making their own Numa Numa dances almost immediately, which is the clearest sign that a thing has stopped belonging to the person who made it. Television picked it up next. Good Morning America came calling and he agreed to appear. CNN and VH1 broadcast the clip. He turned up on The Tonight Show and on Best Week Ever. By late February of 2005, less than 3 months after he uploaded it, the original had drawn close to 2 million views on Newgrounds alone, and that figure did not count the countless other sites now hosting copies. Newgrounds explains why nobody got paid. It ran on submissions and user voting, with awards handed out by the community for the things people liked most, and Brolsma's clip won that kind of recognition early. What the site did not have, because no site had it, was any mechanism for sending money back to the person who made the submission. There was no revenue sharing, no partner program, and no advertising split. YouTube would not launch a program to pay creators a cut of ad money until 2007, nearly 3 years after the Numa Numa dance went up. So in December of 2004, a video could reach an audience larger than most primetime television broadcasts and generate, for the person in it, precisely nothing. The Colorado Department of Internet Money was not exaggerating the situation. It was describing it. The scale is hard to pin down, because every figure attached to these videos is an estimate. By November of 2006, the BBC was reporting it as the second most watched internet video in existence. Viral marketing firm put the total at around 700 million views, and ranked only one video above it, the clip of a Canadian teenager swinging a golf ball retriever, which the same firm estimated at 900 million. Those numbers cannot be verified now, and probably could not have been verified then, since the video existed as thousands of separate copies on thousands of separate sites. What they establish is the order of magnitude. Two ordinary people, neither of whom had sold anything or signed anything, sat at the top of the internet's attention in 2006. Then he stopped. On February 17, 2005, he canceled a scheduled appearance on The Today Show. He stopped returning calls from reporters. He had gone on morning television once and decided that was enough, and the machine that had been booking him did not have a setting for somebody who wanted to get off. 9 days later, the New York Times published a piece about him, and the headline described internet fame as a cruel mistress for a dancer of the Numa Numa. Brolsma did not cooperate with it. Family members spoke instead, and they said he had become depressed and reclusive since the video exploded. The founder of Newgrounds spoke as well. The article framed the whole thing as a cautionary tale, opening on the idea that embarrassing talents used to be a private matter and that the internet had made humiliation public, and it described Brolsma and his dancing in terms that were not kind. A national newspaper reporting that a 19-year-old had withdrawn from public view was, in the same article, part of the reason he had withdrawn. The article was also making a broader argument, and it made it at his expense. It observed that embarrassing talents used to stay inside a family, that the internet had turned humiliation into a public event, and that fame was now being manufactured at a speed nobody was prepared for. All of that was accurate. The example chosen to demonstrate it was a 19-year-old who had already asked to be left alone, and the piece treated his dancing as the punchline of its own thesis. He had appeared on morning television with Diane Sawyer a few weeks earlier and had been fine. What followed was a national newspaper explaining, in print, why being him was a warning to everybody else. The coverage of his discomfort became more coverage. He had made a private joke for friends, watched it reach an audience the size of a country, appeared on television once, and then found that stepping back was itself newsworthy, which meant stepping back did not work. He returned to Saddlebrook and went quiet, and for about 18 months he was simply a person in New Jersey whose face millions of strangers could recognize. He came back in 2006, and he came back on purpose. He set up a YouTube channel that August, and in September he released a follow-up called New Numa. This time nothing about it was accidental. The song was written specifically for the video by a production outfit rather than borrowed from a Moldovan pop group. There was a band, there was a sponsor, with the product worn on camera, and there was a contest, inviting people to make their own versions, with $45,000 in prize money attached to it. The 18-year-old who filmed himself for 15 minutes had turned into a man building a campaign, hiring musicians, and putting up cash to get an audience to participate. It did not work. New Numa was watched, and it was watched by a lot of people by any ordinary standard, but it did not come close to the original, and neither did the videos that followed it. He kept going. There was another Numa video made with an insurance advertiser in 2009, an album in 2008 called Weird Tempo, and another in 2019 called Haunted House of Pancakes, and a short-lived video production company around 2010. He has said he was happy with the follow-up work. The numbers were never in the same category again. This is the first point in the story where somebody tries to build a business on top of a viral video, and the attempt is instructive precisely because it was competent. He identified the problem correctly. The original had no owner, no product, no sponsor, and no way to convert attention into income, so the second attempt had all four. What it did not have was the thing that made the first one spread, which was a person doing something for no reason, with no plan, and no camera crew. Money had been added to the arrangement, and the arrangement stopped working. Canada on Strike drew him into the Colorado Department of Internet Money on April 2, 2008, which was 3 years and 4 months after the upload and 18 months after New Numa had already failed to repeat it. The show treats him as a permanent fixture of the internet, one of the recognizable faces any audience would place instantly, sitting in a chair waiting on a payment. There is a real irony inside that casting, and the episode has no way of knowing it. By the time South Park put him in a line for internet money, he had already tried to collect it properly, with a sponsor and a contest and a band, and it had not worked. He dies in the brawl anyway, killed by the sneezing panda's mother, while the argument over who is most famous plays out around him. His death in that scene is a background event. He gets no lines that matter, and no moment of his own, which is close to how the previous 4 years had actually gone. The person the room contained was a New Jersey computer enthusiast who had made one clip he liked, and the version of him in the chair is a recognizable shape rather than a man with a history. The show needed a face the audience would know on sight, and by 2008, that was all that remained in general circulation. The details had fallen away years earlier. Almost nobody sharing the clip could have named him, said where he lived, or explained that he had spent a year and a half trying not to be looked at. The most useful fact about Brolsma's story arrives later that same year and has nothing to do with him. In late 2008, Dragostea Dinte was used as the main sample in Live Your Life by T.I. and Rihanna, and on November 8, 2008, that record reached #1 on the American charts. The song Brolsma had mimed to in his bedroom was, 4 years later, at the top of the Billboard Hot 100, generating exactly the kind of revenue that comes with a #1 single. He was the reason enormous numbers of Americans had ever heard it. The money went where the publishing rights were, which was nowhere near Saddlebrook. He has continued to be reasonably generous about the whole thing. In a 2010 interview, he said he had been fairly shy before the video and had opened up a little because of it, which is a mild way to describe a period that a national newspaper had covered as a cautionary tale. His agent at that point claimed the video had been viewed more than 1 billion times, a figure that should be treated as a promotional estimate rather than a measurement, because nobody could count copies scattered across that many sites. On December 6, 2014, he uploaded a 10-year reunion video, and Newgrounds marked the anniversary on its own front page. He never fully left, and he never fully cashed in. The anniversary uploads keep arriving on the same date every few years, from the same man, in a room that looks a lot like the first one. The chair is the object that holds the section together. He never gets out of it in the original video, and that limitation is the whole appeal, because the performance is somebody enjoying a song in a small space with nobody watching. Everything that happened afterward was other people deciding what that chair meant. Morning television wanted him in a studio. A newspaper wanted a cautionary tale. A production company wanted a follow-up with a sponsor on his head. South Park wanted him in a different chair entirely, in a government waiting room, holding a claim on money that did not exist. The one thing nobody offered him was a way to be paid for the 15 minutes he actually spent making it, and by the time a cartoon put a claim in his hand, the window in which that claim might have meant something had been closed for years. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Brolsma spends 4 years deciding whether he wants any of this, and the internet keeps him regardless. One boy sitting in the same room never made that decision because he never posted anything, and the tape that made him famous was taken from a shelf at his school. Section 8. Ghislaine Raza. Almost everybody who used the internet in the early 2000s has seen the clip of a teenager swinging a metal pole through an empty room. Almost none of them knew he never put it online himself. Years later, a cartoon seated him among people demanding payment for their fame. A video its subject never released made him famous against his will, and a decade later he decided to say something about it. In November of 2002, a 14-year-old named Ghislaine Raza went into the television studio at his high school in Trois-Rivières, Quebec, and filmed himself for about 1 minute and 48 seconds. He had a golf ball retriever in his hands, a telescoping metal pole with a small basket on the end, and he swung it in a double-sided pattern in imitation of a fight scene from a Star Wars film. He was on his own. When he was finished, he left the cassette on a shelf in the studio and went home, and that is where the story would have ended in any year before that one. He was a shy student who liked making videos, which was not unusual in a school that had a studio available. Nothing about the recording was intended for an audience. It was a boy practicing a sequence he had watched in a cinema, in a room built for exactly that kind of experiment, with nobody else present. The tape was not hidden, and it was not labeled. It sat where students left things. The following spring, classmates found it. They took the cassette, digitized it on the studio computer, and put it on the internet in April of 2003, without telling him and without his permission. Years later, under questioning in court, two of them described what they had been thinking. One said he had considered it an interesting prank and had wanted Raza to know what he had seen. The other said he had only digitized the file to play a joke and had nothing to do with what happened afterward, and that the trouble with the internet is how fast things travel. They traveled very fast. The clip was downloaded, re-edited, scored with music, given lighting effects, and cut into hundreds of other videos by people who had never met him. Editors added a glowing blade to the pole. Others dropped him into film trailers and video game footage. By 2006, one viral marketing firm estimated the original had been seen around 900 million times, which placed it at the top of every list of the most watched internet videos in existence, above the New Jersey teenager dancing in his chair. The figure should be treated with suspicion. For the same reason these stories keep circling back to money. Nobody could count it. The clip existed as thousands of separate files on thousands of separate hosts, most of them uploaded by people who had never spoken to each other, so an estimate in the hundreds of millions was the best anybody could offer. When the original was eventually posted to YouTube, where a counter existed, it registered around 28 million views, a tiny fraction of the estimate. The audience was real and enormous and structurally invisible, which meant there was no ledger anywhere with his name on it, even if he had ever wanted one. At his school, the effect was immediate and physical. Whenever he walked through the common areas, students would climb onto tables and chairs and chant the nickname the internet had given him. There would be shouting and poking and a general commotion aimed at getting a reaction out of him. He has described it plainly, saying it was simply unbearable. This was happening in the building where he was supposed to be attending classes, run by people who had the tape in the first place. Online it was worse, because the volume was unlimited and none of it came from anyone he knew. Strangers left messages telling him he was worthless. Strangers told him to end his life. One commenter described him as a pox on humanity. He has said that no matter how hard he tried to ignore the people telling him to kill himself, he could not stop feeling worthless, as though his life was not worth living. He was 14 when it started. He also lost the few friends he had, because the attention followed him into every room he entered, and being seen with him meant joining whatever was aimed at him that day. None of the people sending those messages knew anything about him. They knew a shape in a striped shirt and a name that had been invented for him by strangers, and that was apparently enough to feel entitled to an opinion about whether he should be alive. He stopped going to school. He left the campus and continued his education through private tutoring, and during that period, he was diagnosed with depression and admitted to a psychiatric ward for children. He eventually returned to high school for his final year and finished. The internet, meanwhile, carried on without any awareness that any of this had happened, because the people watching a 2-minute clip had no way of knowing there was a hospital involved. In July of 2003, his parents filed suit against the families of 4 of his schoolmates, seeking $250,000 Canadian dollars. Proceedings against one of the 4 families were dropped early for lack of evidence. The language of the filing is the clearest available record of the damage, because it was written for a court rather than for a magazine. It stated that Raza had endured and still endured harassment and derision from his high school mates and from the public at large, and that he would be under psychiatric care for an indefinite period. It also raised the possibility that the stigma could interfere with his education and his ability to find work, and that he might eventually need to change his name. The case was scheduled to go to trial on April 10, 2006, almost 3 years after it was filed. On April 7, 3 days before it was due to start, Raza and his parents reached an out-of-court settlement with the defendants, and the terms were never disclosed. Whatever that settlement contained, it could not do the one thing that would have mattered, which was to take the video back. By 2006, the file existed in thousands of copies on thousands of servers belonging to people who had never heard of a courtroom in Quebec. The legal system could assign responsibility for the leak. It had no mechanism for undoing it. 2 years after that settlement, Canada on Strike put him in a chair at the Colorado Department of Internet Money. The show draws him carefully, in a blue striped shirt and khakis, holding the golf ball retriever, waiting his turn behind the counter like everybody else in the room. He is one of the applicants. Then the argument over who is the most famous turns violent, and he is one of the people Tay Zonday shoots. That placement breaks the logic of the entire scene, and the episode does not appear to know it. Every other person in that waiting room made something and put it somewhere. The premise of the joke is that they all chased attention and are now waiting to be paid for it, which is a fair thing to say about a man in a Tron costume or a boy dancing at a webcam. Raza uploaded nothing. He had no claim to file, no audience he had built, and no transaction he had ever entered into. In 2008, he was a 20-year-old in Quebec who had spent 5 years trying to be disconnected from the most watched video on the internet, and a cartoon put him in a line demanding money for it. He was still trying at that point. Until 2013, he took deliberate steps to avoid linking himself publicly to the video, even though his identity had already circulated by other means. Invitations kept arriving from late-night programs and talk shows across a decade, and he turned all of them down. His reason was specific. He assumed they only wanted to turn him into a circus act, which was an accurate assessment of what most of those bookings were for, and which he had reached without ever needing to sit in one of the chairs. Then, in May of 2013, 10 years after the leak, he gave an interview to the journalist Jonathan Trudel, published in the Quebec magazine L'Actualité and simultaneously in Maclean's. It was the first time anybody had heard him speak about it. He called the period a very dark one. He said what he saw directed at him was mean and it was violent. He explained that he had lost his friends, changed schools, and spent years unable to shake the feeling that his life was worth nothing. He was 25 years old, and he had been carrying that quietly the entire time. The internet was making edits of him. He also explained why he chose that moment. He had been watching a run of high-profile cases in which young people had died after sustained online harassment, and he decided that staying silent was no longer the right choice. What he asked for was practical rather than personal. He said he hoped school authorities would step in now in a way that nobody had stepped in for him, and he addressed young people going through the same thing directly, telling them to get past the shame and ask for help, that they would survive it and get through it, and that they were not alone and were surrounded by people who loved them. The response was enormous, and it was mostly what he had hoped for. Readers wrote in to thank him. Trudel said afterward that the reaction proved Raza had been right to speak, and that it showed how much had been learned from the cases that came before. A portion of the response went the other way. Some readers argued that a funny video is not a bad thing, and that there was nothing wrong with having laughed at it, which is a reasonable position to hold about a clip, and an impossible one to hold once the person inside the clip has explained what the decade cost him. What he built afterward is the part of this story that has no equivalent anywhere else in this video. He served as president of a heritage conservation society in Trois-Rivières. He graduated in law from McGill University in 2011 and returned for a master's degree in 2020, later pursuing doctoral study at Queen's University in Ontario, and has worked as a civil lawyer in Montreal in public interest law. In 2013, the same year as the interview, he co-founded a Quebec nonprofit called Fondation Équité de Jeunesse, focused on youth well-being, digital citizenship, and media literacy. In 2022, he appeared in a National Film Board documentary about the video and its aftermath, which took him back to his old high school and was nominated for a Canadian Screen Award in 2024. There is one detail in the 2003 filing that becomes remarkable in hindsight. His parents' lawyers raised the possibility that the stigma might eventually force him to change his name. 10 years later, he did the opposite. He put his own name in a magazine, on the record, attached to the video, and asked to be understood as Ghislaine Raza rather than as the nickname strangers had given him. The thing his family had once listed as a potential future harm became the tool he used to take the story back, and the coverage that followed the interview began referring to him by name for the first time in a decade. That documentary put him back inside the building where the tape had been sitting on a shelf 20 years earlier, which is a fairly exact reversal of how the story began. In 2002, a boy left a cassette in a school studio, and other people decided what happened to it. In 2022, he walked into the same school with a camera crew he had agreed to for a film he was participating in about a subject he had chosen to discuss. The golf ball retriever was school equipment, kept for fishing balls out of water hazards, picked up by a 14-year-old because it happened to be the right shape and the right length for a scene he liked. Everything that followed was other people's work. Classmates digitized it, strangers scored it, editors added a glowing blade, a court assigned blame for it, and a cartoon drew the pole into his hand and sat him in a queue for money. The one person who never made a single decision about how that video would be used is the one person still holding it in every version of the image. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Raza spends 10 years refusing to be the person the internet made, and then chooses the terms himself. Somebody else in that queue had gone viral by begging the world to leave a stranger alone, and the audience decided the person crying was the funnier target. Section 9. Chris Crocker. In September of 2007, a 2-minute video filmed against a bedsheet became one of the most watched things on the internet, and the person in it was defending somebody else. Within a day, the audience had decided the crying was the funny part. A cartoon seated its creator in a waiting room and killed the character off in a brawl. The person whose fame came from real feeling spent years being treated as a reusable joke. Britney Spears performed at the MTV Video Music Awards on September 9, 2007, and the reviews were savage. She had shaved her head that February, had been in and out of rehab, and had lost custody of her children children, all of it covered in detail by outlets that treated each development as entertainment. The following day, September 10th, Chris Crocker posted a video responding to how she was being treated. It runs about 2 minutes. The setting is a bedroom in a small town in Tennessee. The backdrop is a white sheet. The eyeliner is heavy and running, and the argument is simple. The media should stop tearing a person apart for sport. Crocker was 19 and living with grandparents. School had ended after the 8th grade because the bullying there had become impossible to sit through, so the education continued at home, and the videos started as an outlet for somebody with a lot of time and nobody to talk to. That detail explains what YouTube was for in that house. It was a place to play a character. Crocker has described the earlier videos as performances built to make people laugh, and has said that being authentic on camera was never part of the plan. The platform was barely 2 years old. YouTube in 2007 ran on novelty, with a featured videos section that pushed odd, cheap, funny clips to the front and produced hits about shoe shopping and cartoon unicorns. Chocolate Rain came out of that same environment a few months earlier. Nothing on the site was optimized, nothing was sponsored, and nobody uploading had a strategy, because there was no strategy available yet. A person filmed something in a bedroom, and either the internet found it or it did not. This one, the internet found within hours. The video collected over 2 million views in its first 24 hours, which had no precedent for a clip of one person talking to a camera. It went up on MySpace and Metacafe the same day, and was picked up by blogs before the day ended. By September 20, 10 days after the upload, it had passed 8 million views on YouTube alone. There was no promotion behind any of it. A teenager had posted a video about a pop star, and by the end of the week, the video was bigger news than the performance that prompted it. There were actually 2 videos in that first stretch, not one. The plea that spread was part of a short run of clips made in the same few days about the same subject, and the internet selected the one it wanted and discarded the rest, which is roughly how the process worked in 2007. The chosen file then kept growing for years without any involvement from the person in it. By 2012, it had passed 43 million views. At some point after that, the YouTube account that had hosted it was shut down, and the versions of the video still circulating were copies uploaded by other people. So the most watched clip of that autumn ended up living permanently on channels belonging to strangers, monetized by whoever had reposted it, and the people reposting it were the only ones in a position to earn anything from it. 8 million views in 2007 is a figure that needs translating. YouTube was 2 years old, broadband was not universal, and most people still watched video on television. A clip that reached 8 million people in 10 days was competing with primetime programming while being hosted for free on a website made by one person with no budget and no distributor. The advertising machinery that would eventually turn numbers like that into an income did not exist on the platform yet, so the reach was enormous, verifiable, and worth exactly nothing to the person who generated it. Crocker found out how big from a cashier. Standing in a small Tennessee grocery store with a grandmother, the cashier recognized the face and said it had just been on Fox News. By the time they got home, the clip was on TMZ, on NPR, in the New York Times. Nothing in 2007 prepared anyone for filming something in a bedroom at night and waking up as a national news item, because it had not happened to anyone before in quite that way. What followed was not a discussion about Britney Spears. Fox and Friends made jokes about Crocker rather than about the argument. Jimmy Kimmel mocked the way Crocker looked and sounded. Comedians and talk hosts across American television used the clip as a punchline for weeks, and the comment sections underneath the video filled with people saying Crocker should be dead. Crocker has said the threats were serious enough to be frightening, and has described physical attacks in gay bars and on the street. The content of the video was a request to stop hounding a vulnerable person. The response was a national campaign of hounding aimed at whoever had made the request. The industry response arrived at the same speed as the abuse. Within about 10 days, a Los Angeles production company had signed Crocker to star in a reality series, described by its producer as a rebel character audiences would find interesting. Speaking to ABC News that week, Crocker declined to give a real name, confirmed being 19, said the home was a small Tennessee town, and said the ambition was acting, so the same fortnight produced death threats and a development deal, generated by exactly the same 2 minutes of footage, and the deal existed because of the mockery rather than in spite of it. Somebody had worked out that the audience laughing was an audience worth selling. 6 months later, Canada on strike put Crocker in a chair at the Colorado Department of Internet Money. The character is drawn recognizably, sitting among the other applicants, waiting for a clerk. Then the argument over who is the most famous escalates, and Crocker is one of the people killed by the sneezing panda's mother in the background, without a line that matters to the scene. That treatment is the clearest statement of what the waiting room actually is. The person who had produced the most watched video of that autumn appears in the episode as scenery, positioned in a queue, and removed during a brawl about ranking. There is no cruelty specific to South Park in it. The show was describing the going rate. In 2008, A person who had been on Fox News, TMZ, NPR, and a development deal within 2 weeks was worth a background death in a crowd shot, and the audience would still recognize the face. There is something underneath the video that almost nobody knew at the time. Crocker's mother had recently returned home from serving in Iraq. She was homeless and had developed an addiction to methamphetamine, and the family had given up on her. Money Crocker earned was going toward putting her in hotel rooms night after night so she had somewhere to sleep. The two women Crocker looked up to most were both coming apart in public and in private at the same time, and one of them was a pop star being dismantled on television while the other one was living in motels. That is why the video reads the way it does. Crocker has said plainly that the Britney videos were the first ones without any performance in them, and has described that moment as a piece of the real person rather than the character the channel had been built on. The plea to leave somebody alone came from a house where nobody was leaving anybody alone. It also came with a decision attached. Crocker knew that explaining what was happening at home would not get a hearing because nobody was going to take a 19-year-old in eyeliner seriously about anything, so the choice was to lean the other way. If the audience had already decided this was a joke, then acting like a joke was the only available strategy. That decision worked, and it cost something. Playing the joke kept the bookings coming and kept the attention alive, and it also buried the actual content of the video for well over a decade. Every talk show segment treating the clip as hysteria was treating a genuine argument as a bit, and the person making the argument had agreed to help because the alternative was being ignored by people who were going to laugh anyway. Crocker marked the 10-year anniversary in September of 2017 with a new video of roughly the same length, containing 4 pieces of advice for an audience that had grown to around 750,000 followers on Instagram. The first was not to let what people say online get in. The second was not to let other people's words define you. The explanation of the original came with it, including the situation at home and the reason for having said nothing about it at the time. The presentation had changed by then. The heavy eyeliner and the long hair belonged to 2007. Then the culture turned around. After the documentary about Britney Spears and her conservatorship in early 2021, the same argument Crocker had made in a bedroom in Tennessee became the mainstream position, and people who had spent 14 years quoting the clip as a joke started saying out loud that Crocker had been right the whole time. Crocker used the moment to repeat the point rather than to collect an apology, saying the real problem was that people treat the famous as though money makes their difficulties disappear. The timing of that reversal is worth laying out because it happened quickly once it started. The documentary about Spears and her conservatorship arrived in February of 2021. The public reassessment of how she had been treated followed over the next several months, and in November of that year, a court in Los Angeles ended the conservatorship that had governed her life since 2008. Somewhere inside that sequence, the internet quietly agreed that a teenager in Tennessee had reached the right conclusion in September of 2007, 14 years before the institutions did, and had been mocked on national television for it. The last thing that happened with the video is the part that belongs in this video specifically. In April of 2021, Crocker minted Leave Britney Alone as a non-fungible token and put it up for auction on a marketplace called Foundation, starting at 10 Ethereum, which was worth a little under $24,000 at the time. 2 bidders fought over it for several days, and on April 12th, the sale closed at just under 19 Ethereum, roughly $44,000. The stated reason for selling it was to reclaim the thing after watching it be parodied for years. The description attached to the sale noted the 2 million views in the first day and pointed out that it had been made by a gender-bending teenage high school dropout in a grandparent's bedroom by somebody with no idea the message would land properly years later. That transaction is the first time in this entire story that anybody gets paid for the viral moment itself, and the mechanism did not involve an audience at all. There was no advertiser, no platform split, and no crowd to please. There were 2 anonymous bidders and a file, not for a sponsorship, not for a follow-up, not for a booking on a morning show, and not through an advertising split that did not exist yet. Somebody bought ownership of the 2 minutes. 14 years after the fact, one of the people South Park drew waiting in that government office turned the original file into roughly $44,000, which is not a fortune and is considerably more than a transparent check. The white sheet was hung up in a grandparent's bedroom by a 19-year-old whose mother was sleeping in hotel rooms, and it became one of the most copied backdrops of the decade, reproduced in parodies, sketches, and Halloween costumes by people who thought the crying was the joke. The argument delivered in front of it turned out to be correct, and the correction arrived from a courtroom in Los Angeles, rather than from any of the people who had made the jokes. The person who made that argument spent 14 years as the punchline for having made it, watched the clip live on other people's channels, and then sold the original file to a stranger. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Crocker eventually finds a buyer for the exact 2 minutes the internet took for free. One man in that same waiting room never never looked for one. He built his costume by hand for a convention masquerade and has spent 20 years being laughed at in it on purpose. Section 10. Jay Maynard. A computer programmer in Minnesota built a glowing bodysuit by hand so he could wear it at a convention masquerade. The internet turned the photographs into one of its earliest running jokes, and a cartoon later filed him in a line of people demanding payment for being famous. He was the one person in that room with nothing to collect, and his presence there says a great deal about everybody else in the line. Jay Maynard was born in 1960, and by 2004 he was a working computer programmer and system administrator living in Fairmont, Minnesota, a town of around 11,000 people. His hobbies were the hobbies of a certain kind of engineer. He held an amateur radio license with his own call sign. He flew light aircraft and had been flying for around 2 decades. He was, and remained for years afterward, the volunteer maintainer of a free emulator that lets ordinary computers run software written for IBM mainframes, which is unpaid technical work done for the benefit of people he would never meet. None of that is the reason anybody knows his name. In April of 2004, he built a costume based on the 1982 film Tron from scratch, using electroluminescent wire to reproduce the glowing circuit lines from the movie's light suits. He wore it to PenguiCon, a combined science fiction and Linux convention in Michigan, and entered the masquerade, where it won the award for best workmanship. That detail matters more than it usually gets credit for. Before any of this became a joke, a room full of people who build things for a living looked at his suit and judged it the best-made object in the competition. He put the build online because the process was worth documenting. He created a page of photographs on his own website showing the costume and himself wearing it, along with notes on how he had made it. Then, on April 18, 2004, he submitted the link to Slashdot, the technology news site, which had recently run a piece about making Tron costumes. His post was straightforward and pleased with itself in a mild way, describing the workmanship award and saying he thought the results had come out well. The response was not mild. The Slashdot thread accumulated more than 300 comments, most of them negative, and the shape of the joke established itself within hours. He was a heavy middle-aged man in tight spandex, and that was the entire content of the reaction. From Slashdot it spread to Fark, to Boing Boing, and to a long list of forums and blogs, and by the end of the month the photographs were being passed around the internet independently of the page they came from and independently of anything he had written about building them. The mechanics of that spread explain why nothing about this could have paid him. There was no video and no platform. YouTube did not exist yet. What existed was a page of still photographs on a website he owned and paid for himself, and the way the internet consumed it was by linking to that page from aggregators and forums, so every person laughing was arriving at his personal site and using his bandwidth to do it. The site is long defunct now and survives only in archives. He hosted his own humiliation at his own expense, and there was no counter attached, no advertising slot, and nobody keeping a ledger of the traffic. In 2004, the only thing a person could receive for being interesting on the internet was attention, delivered straight to a server bill. He has said the comments hurt at first, which is the honest answer, and not the one people expect from a meme. What changed was noticing that a minority of the responses were not mocking at all, and that some people admired the commitment or recognized themselves in it. So he made a decision, and he has described it in the plainest possible terms. If somebody had a problem with it, too bad. He was going to have fun his way. The media requests started arriving after that, and he was clear-eyed about what they were for. He has said the programs approaching him were coming at it strictly from the angle of making fun of the geek, which was accurate. In early May of 2004, he appeared on Jimmy Kimmel Live, and the introduction he received was built around how unusual it was for a man in his 40s to dress up as a character from a film. He went on anyway, in the suit, and answered the questions. Something unexpected came out of that. He was enough of a success on the program that Kimmel brought him back repeatedly, with fan records of the era putting the eventual total at around 15 appearances, and then hired him as a temporary on-air correspondent, sending him out into the world as Tron Guy to interview people. He covered a bodybuilding contest. He covered a Pitbull show. He covered a screening of a political documentary. Each time, in full costume, he steered the conversation back around to Tron. His own assessment of the whole run is that the shows had come to laugh at him, and he thinks he won them over. His own explanation of the Tron Guy persona is the funniest thing in this section, and probably the most revealing. He has described it as a simple payroll withholding calculation program that had become overweight because of changes in the tax law. That is a programmer's joke about his own body, told voluntarily by a man who had spent years reading that people found his shape disgusting. Nobody scripted that for him, and no producer suggested it. He had taken the thing the internet used against him and turned it into a line about mainframe software. Everything about that response runs opposite to the rest of these stories. Every other person in the Department of Internet Money waiting room had fame arrive as something done to them. Maynard was mocked at exactly the same volume and simply declined to treat it as an injury. He kept the domain he had registered plastered for the suit, kept a public journal running on it, kept turning up at conventions in the costume, and kept saying yes to television, and he did all of it without once appearing to want anything back except the chance to keep wearing his costume. He also used the attention for something. In 2006, he appeared in a music video made to advocate for network neutrality, alongside other internet celebrities of the period, including Leslie Hall and Randy Constan, arguing for rules that would keep the platforms he had become famous on from being carved up by the companies carrying the traffic. A man whose entire public profile consisted of being laughed at on the internet was lobbying to keep the internet open. Nobody paid him for that either. Canada on Strike placed him in the Colorado Department of Internet Money on April 2, 2008. He sits in the waiting room in the suit among the other applicants, holding a claim on the money the office supposedly distributes. When the argument over who is the most famous escalates, he is one of the people killed by the sneezing panda's mother. The whole appearance lasts seconds, and it is completely appropriate, because by 2008, he was one of the faces any audience would place instantly, and the show needed exactly that. 2 months after the episode aired, he bought an aeroplane. It was a new AMD Zodiac XLI, and he had it custom painted with blue circuitry to match the costume. A later profile put the cost at just over $133,000. That purchase is the cleanest possible summary of his relationship with the fame, and it runs in the opposite direction from everybody else in this story. He did not convert the joke into income. He spent his own money extending the joke into the sky, which brings the section to the number that matters. In an interview at an internet culture convention in 2012, Maynard confirmed that he had never cashed in on any of it. The only money the Tron suit had ever earned him was a union wage for appearing on Kimmel, paid because the production was obliged to pay him for being on camera. Every trip to a convention, including the one he was speaking at, came out of his own pocket. 8 years of television, conventions, articles, and interviews had produced one paycheck, and that paycheck existed because of a labor agreement rather than because anybody had built a way to pay him. That is the answer to the transparent check, arriving from the least likely person in the room. Everybody else in that waiting room had a grievance available to them. Zonde had reach with no return. Brolsma had tried to build a business and watched it fail. Raza had a settlement that could not remove the file. Crocker eventually sold ownership of the original. Maynard sat in the same chair with no grievance at all because he had never expected the arrangement to pay him and had structured his participation accordingly. He kept his job as a programmer, kept maintaining the emulator, and treated the costume as what it had been in the first place, which was a hobby. He did keep saying yes to things. He appeared on a Comedy Central program built around internet clips. He wore the suit to his local cinema in Minnesota to watch the Tron sequel in December of 2010, which got him a segment on CNN. In 2011, he auditioned for the 6th season of America's Got Talent, went on stage in the costume, and talked about how he had become internet famous. All 3 judges buzzed him, and all 3 voted no, which ended his run. Then the program invited him back for the season finale as one of 10 audition all-stars, and he performed again in the suit to a track from the Tron sequel. He had been rejected as a contestant and recalled as a spectacle, and he took the second booking as readily as the first. By 2012, the suit was falling apart. Small holes had opened in the fabric, the material around the zipper had begun to rip, sections of the light-up armor were broken, and the slip-on shoes had gone from pale white to a cracked greenish color. He said he kept telling himself he would fix it and never got around to it. He was still wearing it. He had not missed a PenguiCon since the first one and had no intention of missing another. His unpaid technical work sits beside all of this in a way that makes the pattern obvious. For years, he maintained a free emulator that lets ordinary computers run software built for IBM mainframes. As a volunteer, for the benefit of institutions and hobbyists he had no financial relationship with. The costume was the same instinct pointed at a different target. He built a difficult object well, put the results where people could see them, and never attached a price to either one. The suit was the only object in any of these 10 stories that was never for sale. The other applicants in that waiting room were holding claims on files that strangers had copied, scored, remixed, and reposted, and the value of those files had drained away to platforms and reposters and publishing rights. Maynard's asset was a handmade costume with holes in it, kept in a house in Fairmont, Minnesota, and worn by the man who built it whenever he felt like it. He has said the only way any of this works is if it stays spontaneous and unexpected, and that the meme celebrities who chase it are missing the point. He is the one person the Department of Internet Money could never have shortchanged because he walked in without a claim and the clerk had nothing he wanted. Across these 10 stories, the same object keeps changing shape. This video opened with the money already enormous. A man filming his own face made roughly $4 million in a single year. 2 creators put their names on a bottle and moved a reported $1 billion of it. A subscription page removed the middleman completely and left nobody able to say who was paying for what. A 4th grader monetized his own opinions at $60 a week. Then, the story went backwards to a government office that handed out checks you could see straight through, and to the people sitting in its waiting room. A song written about institutional racism was taken for a novelty for 10 years, while the man who wrote it borrowed money from his parents. A chair a teenager never got out of made a Moldovan pop record profitable for somebody else. A golf ball retriever taken off a school shelf cost a 14-year-old his schooling. A bedsheet held up the correct argument about a pop star for 14 years before anybody agreed with it, and a handmade costume with holes in it earned exactly one union wage, paid because a labor agreement required somebody to pay it. Every barrier that made the theoretical dollar funny came down, one after another, in under 20 years. South Park was wrong about internet money, and it was wrong in the most expensive direction possible. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.